This is the European History Lecture for Friday, the 10th of September, 2021. Before we begin, earlier today, just a little while ago, the school was invited to participate in commemoration of the 20th anniversary of the atrocities of September the 11th, 2001, perpetrated by Islamist fundamentalists. Quite a large number of people showed up, which was nice to see. Before I go in, I thought I would devote 5 minutes to 10 minutes at most to any questions, comments, or thoughts that you might have about these events and why they are worth remembering or understanding. If you don't have questions, we'll forge ahead.
Can we replace if nobody has questions?
Raise your hand if you have a question. Now, is there anyone who would like to hear somebody's voice besides Ms. Velasco's? Because if you raise your hand, I'll call on you first. Mr. Lambert.
No.
I find it really amazing that you were talking about how the plane that was meant for the Congress was taken over by the passengers, and that is, it's just amazing to think that people would put their life on the line, without any guarantee that they're going to stop it.
This is the truth of medieval life and of life in a state of savagery that we, in our very civilized, cushy, modern West, have forgotten. It's something, honestly, that Western Europe has forgotten, but Eastern Europe not so much, because Eastern Europe has a much fresher memory of genuine tyranny and oppression under the jackboot of Soviet communism. You aren't really exempted from protecting your own life. You aren't really exempted from protecting your own freedom. There may be police, please do make sure you have your masks on. There may be police, there may be courts, we certainly have a respectable military. But as somebody who grew up in an area with high crime, I can tell you, walking down the street could result in you being mugged. And you'd have to choose. Do you surrender your goods and hope that the mugger doesn't stab you for the fun of it, or shoot you for the fun of it? Because in the highly gun-controlled city of New York, there were plenty of guns just in the hand of lawbreakers. Or do you fight? Each of you, I have said again and again, if you've had me in years before, and I've said at least once this year, each of you will come to moments, plural, moments in your life where you have to take a stand for what you believe that will be difficult, or where you choose not to. Either choice will be definitive, will shape the kind of person that you are. Either choice will affect your ability to look yourself in the eye with any degree of self-respect or even self-toleration as you get ready in the mirror in the morning. You, as you step from childhood into adulthood, will have opportunities to stand up and be counted, or to fade into the background and let things proceed as if you were not even there. It is so tempting for people to do that. To dream the dream of peace and imagine that they are not involved. One of the worst stories that I know is the story of Kitty Genovese. Kitty Genovese was a young Bronx woman heading home late at night, before midnight, actually around 9 or 10 at night. And as she was approaching the courtyard of her building, and her building was sort of an inverted U shape, so she walked into the courtyard and you get building. It's the summertime in the Bronx, and the summertime in the Bronx is like being in a tropical leafing rainforest. And in 1964-65, when this happened, people in the Bronx, for the most part, could not afford air conditioning. So everyone's window was wide open. A rapist attacked her in the courtyard, and for over an hour violated her. She screamed at the top of her lungs. Because of the size of the building that she was in, there is no doubt that hundreds of apartments filled with people heard these screams. Not one person called the police. Not one person came down to help. Not one person even shouted out the window, "Stop!" They let it happen. And when the police tried getting corroborating information from those neighbors, most of them denied hearing anything, even though it was the Bronx in the high summer on a stinking hot, humid night where every window that could be was open. That has always told me about one of the dark sides of human nature. We don't want to get involved. And you have to overcome that sense of self-preservation if you want to be a person with courage. You have to overcome your own sense of run, hide, blend in, if you want to stand up for your beliefs. Now, in a republic like ours, you have the blessed opportunity to do that, to be a person of principle, to fight for your beliefs. I once told a student who talked about how annoyed they were at being punished for protesting. And I looked at them and I said, "You don't understand. In this country, if you protest in a way that disrupts things and is unlawful, you're going to be punished. You don't have a right to do that. But it's an honor. If you're a person of principle, it is an honor to suffer for your beliefs." One of Gandhi's, actually the thing Gandhi was probably the most proud of. If you know Gandhi, he's the great pacifistic leader who brought India out from British domination. Gandhi went to jail repeatedly on basis of principle. If you stand up for something, you'll pay for it. You will suffer. You will get in a fight. You may lose the fight. You may end up in jail. Worse. But you will have stood up for a belief. And that means you will have justified the freedom that you inherited. There are people around the world who have governments run by not the elected, but the most violent thugs within the society. Most countries on earth are run by violent thugs and their bully boys with guns. And in a country like that, if you step up on principle, you're going to die. Had Gandhi not been dealing with the British, had he been dealing with the Nazis or the Japanese Imperial Army or any number of other people, including Putin in Russia, Gandhi would have been killed. So would his allies in the Congress Party. Because Putin doesn't make any bones about doing what he needs to do for power. He's a KGB colonel, and the KGB is vicious. The British thought of themselves as good people, so they didn't kill Gandhi. They followed the law. Gandhi knew that. Anyway, I'm going on and on. Oddly, the people who did 9/11 were men of principle. That's something you can't deny. And if the terrorists win this war, which I've been saying for 20 years they can if we let them, just like the North Vietnamese won in Vietnam because we allowed it to happen, it's going to be because they're dedicated to victory and we're not. Because most Americans just would rather it go away. Inconvenient. Whereas the hardcore of the terrorists are willing to die right here, right now, today, for God. That kind of dedication is worthy of respect. And it's something that many Americans assume that our smart bombs and our laser-guided technology can counter. No. Both sides need to be dedicated to victory if there's going to be a fight. They are. We may not be. And I don't mean every American, I mean our leadership. In any event, any other thoughts, or if you wish to counter or argue against anything that I just said, I thought it a conversation worth having. So, I'm looking for anyone who hasn't said anything yet first. Okay.
Do you think if more of our leaders had military experience like our presidents, like how they used to have experience? I can't recall exactly if President serving at the time of 9/11 had military experience?
George W. Bush had served in the Texas Air National Guard during the Vietnam War. So he was a veteran, but he was not a combat veteran. Before that, Clinton had no military experience. After that, Obama had none. Trump had none. And I don't think Biden did either.
Do you think it would be better if our presidents did have military experience with this?
Yeah, I do. I do, and it's for this reason. In this sense, I'm very much a Roman. And I'm not a veteran. I'm blind in my eye, my left eye. I was unfit for military service. But I tend to believe that a person who's willing to put their one and only life on the line for their country has earned the right to help shape its future. So, while it would be impossible to restrict the vote to people who choose a dangerous form of national service, it's not too much for me to ask that our leaders, if they're aspiring to political office, have done something. Now, does it have to be serving in war? What if you're a pacifist? Well, work in an ambulance. Do something dangerous for the greater good for a while and earn the right to help speak for other people. My opinion. What do you think?
I personally agree with you. I think that if you wish to be in a position where you have that amount of power, you need to understand the sacrifices that are serving make every day. And if you don't do that, you won't have sympathy for nearly as much. That was one of the things here with Afghanistan. It was kind of like there wasn't as much sympathy as you would think. There's no knowledge of what those people went through, and then they're being put into an even harder situation. They're trying to get out, and it's just a mess.
There are times when Hollywood can actually help with that. There are a couple of really good movies about Afghanistan. Lone Survivor is one, American Sniper is another. But not many people have seen them. not that many. I'll also play a devil's advocate just for a moment. What a person who doesn't like the military would say in response to you and me is, what you want is somebody who's been brainwashed. They characterize basic training as brainwashing. And so, instead of having a free-thinking artist or poet, you're restricting leadership to grunts who have been programmed by their country to kill. Now, this sort of attitude is not at all even comfortable for me to say, but it exists out there. There are people who reflexively hate the military. And in America, since Vietnam, those people are usually very vocal. Anything more before I go?
Disrespect those who are, like, what those people don't understand is that these men and women are putting their lives on the line to protect their beliefs, and they can say that, but it's a huge disrespect for those men and women.
Yeah, because those men and women are not all conservative Republicans.
No.
There are quite a few Democrats who serve in the military, and there's an old saying, and I'm probably going to garble it. I absolutely disagree with you, but I would die to protect your right to say. And that's the way the military is in this country. Indeed. Sam?
I find it amazing after hearing that people would think that military personnel take what they do lightly.
I used to work with a lieutenant colonel who was a combat veteran. This guy looked like a saddlebag with eyes. He was special forces, and he was the head of our JROTC program in the high school I used to work at. And there were colleagues of mine who, whenever he spoke, would respond with deep disrespect, as if he didn't know what he was talking about because he had once worn a uniform, and because he had gotten his education in the military, he wasn't really educated. It was a nasty, personal sort of thing. I can't describe it any better than I just have, and I never understood that. I can understand disagreeing with somebody, but the degree of disdain and contempt with which they treated this guy who had risked death and killed for his country and taken men out of danger, I just never understood it, and I still don't.
It's the ritualism. It's the idea that, oh, well, since I'm choosing who I am.
Yeah.
Chosen court.
Yeah. Haley, you've been champing at the bit. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll go and I'll then come to you.
Um, a good book that you should read that details what someone who goes to the Middle East goes through is called What Was Asked of Us. It's about basically 2003 to 2005 in Iraq. It's first-hand accounts of stories that happened, like anyone from infantry marines to mortuary repairs, military police.
Please do me the favor of sending me an email with a link to its Amazon. That's fine too. But the email would help me to consider whether I want to buy it. So either way, I'd like to see it. Miss Velasco, was there anyone else? Is there anyone I haven't seen over here? Haley,
I'm okay.
you're okay?
Yeah.
You know, she talks to me at the end of the commemorative event about how much she wants to say something in class. And when she arrives, she talks about how much she wants to say something in class. And then when push comes to shove, she blesses us by not saying anything in
I have a friend
class.
who'd like to say for me.
Okay.
Because you'll listen to her, so.
I'll listen to you
No,
too.
no, you won't.
Okay.
Okay.
Today at any time will you be addressing the mandate from last night that was discussed?
Honestly, the president does not have the kind of power to mandate a universal vaccination. Our constitutional system is very clear checks and balances. I don't care about unconstitutional presidential orders. I won't obey. Now, I will also freely admit, I had better things to do last night, like clean the rust out of the bottom of my air conditioner water pan. I don't listen to Biden very often. I haven't read deep recounts of the news. So what exactly did he propose?
Yes, I really would.
Quickly.
Okay, so basically, he said that any business that has over 100 people, 100 workers, must mandate the vaccination. And if you do not, you have to get a weekly COVID test. Out of pocket, you have to pay for it unless your employer decides to pay for it.
This is not about COVID. This is about governmental power. This is about seeing if the people will accept being ruled as if we were peasants. We're not. It's an unconstitutional order. The president does not have the power to do that. If the Congress passed a law to that effect, it would still, I think, be dicey constitutionally, and it would have to pass review in the courts. As it is, there's no question in my mind that people will sue to get this stayed, and that some judge somewhere will approve a stay on this. I'll have to look into it more to say anything more intelligent about it. It is not the President of the United States' role, read the Constitution, it's not very long, to protect us from ourselves and our own bad choices. I'll finish with her and then I'll go to you, Roberta.
I'm a little bit confused on how that was like allowed to be discussed. Do you believe it's the him giving options of either getting the vaccine or getting the test card that allows him, instead of just, hey, I have like mandating everyone to get the vaccine? Is it the options that are?
Well, he has a better chance of controlling businesses than of controlling over 300 million United States citizens. So that is why he's doing it through the businesses. I'm trying to give a fair answer. No doubt people who support his position would argue that he is acting within the ability of a presidential decree to protect the population from a rampant plague. I think that that's questionable. I also suspect, and this is a more diplomatic way of saying what I said earlier, I suspect that what this is about is testing and seeing if federal power can be accepted if it's applied in this fashion. If it's accepted, if most people roll over and accept it, if the court system approves it, then it becomes a precedent for future government action. What about protecting the environment, which again is something, I am not a person who believes in rapid man-made climate change. And if I did believe in it, I wouldn't believe that a global socialist order, a global regulatory system would solve the problem. I really wouldn't. So I don't believe in climate change, but what if in the name of climate change and in the name of ending starvation, we cut American meat consumption radically? And it becomes, since the government does healthcare now, it becomes a public health issue how much bacon, beef, and chicken I consume. We should instead shift over again to a peasant-like diet of more vegetables and grains and much less meat. And that would be good for the environment. At what point does private choice become public policy? And that is always the battleground in the United States and in the Western world. What role should government play? Should government be a manager to help make life better? Or is government a necessary evil to protect us from the bad people within and outside of our society? Conservatives tend to think government is a necessary evil, and conservatives tend not to want to expand government power. Progressives, on the other hand, see most problems as being solvable by government policy. And it frustrates them that the United States is a federal system, where local governments, state governments, and the United States federal government all have different powers, divided, and where within the federal government there is the executive, legislative, and judicial branch. We come from the Roman Republic, where no single individual was ever entrusted with too much power. Even the dictator, who had total power, was in office for only 6 months, and they could be sued for every unconstitutional thing they did the moment they left office. Checks and balances work against the application of government power upon the citizenry. That's why it exists. Read the Federalist Papers. Our founders talk extensively about this. Now, this is very different from European social democracies and European forms of government that reflect much more that of the Roman Empire than of the Roman Republic. Yes?
You said it was about the power and kind of showing dominance or against Constitution.
Yes.
But what about the required vaccines for people at school, like for hepatitis and other things that they have to get in order to attend school? What's the difference between the COVID vaccine and these?
The difference is that those vaccines are tested and went through an approval process that took many years. The COVID vaccine was rushed by President Trump and, at the end, President Biden. So there are fair questions that could be asked scientifically about the healthiness of doing that, number one. Number two, the establishment of those vaccine requirements took decades. So families had an opportunity to make decisions over a period of time. This is being foisted immediately. So I would argue that you're right, that the principle of governments requiring vaccines, certain vaccines, to attend school are directed against diseases that run rampant among small children, and it is a public health issue. COVID does not affect young people. I am much more at risk of dying of it than you are. I mean, ridiculously much more. I'm overweight, I'm diabetic, and I'm older. The difference between a panic reaction and a long-established policy that's built over time, to me, is a critical difference in legitimacy. In other words, if this were the Black Death, if this were the Ebola virus, if this was something that was truly dangerous to everyone, I would probably at least think about feeling differently. But because it's a disease that really does not affect you very much, and because it is being done quickly, and instead of the president going to Congress, instead of the states coming up with laws, most of those vaccines were not done at the federal level at first, they were done at state level. And in the American system, the states are much more involved in the personal life of people, the federal government much less so. I don't know if that answer makes sense. You certainly don't have to agree with it. Do you have any thoughts before I move on?
I guess I understand, because I was also thinking about the fact that they haven't been watching them for like 5 or 10 years. What happens after that? But I don't really have any.
Thank you for saying what you said. I appreciate it. Any other thoughts? Okay, I've got to move on, so please make it quick. Haley and then Sam.
So about it affecting you more than like any of us in here.
Yeah.
So the new variant is said to affect 18 to 22-year-old, I believe. It hit a lot heavier on them, so that's why like the hospital is so bad right now, just because of how the new variant is affecting people, and especially like for me being a type 1 diabetic, it's
yeah, I'm only a type 2.
So
I'm not as good a diabetic as you are.
Since that's so bad,
yeah,
being hit so much worse.
No, and that's
my mom is like super anti about it.
But the thing is, if decisions need to be made about health like that, they should be made at the local or state level, not by the President of the United States. Just constitutionally, it bugs me. It's not the President's role, in my judgment. Yes, and then Sam. Actually, no, Sam, and then you. You get last word.
Okay.
I think it's as simple as saying, since it's not provided for in the Constitution, that it's up to the government to mandate these things. It falls to the state.
In fact, there's a whole constitutional amendment that says exactly that.
Yeah.
But the Interstate Commerce Clause of the Constitution is the highway through which all progressive social policy at the federal level flows.
Yeah.
So in the name of controlling interstate commerce, we have a federal welfare system. We have a federal healthcare system. We have a federal aid to infants and women and infants and children, and every other federal system, federal housing programs. None of these things are accounted for in the Constitution.
Well, I think it should just be as simple with everything like education, control over curriculum. It should just be as simple as saying, it's not provided for in the Constitution for the federal government.
State and local.
About that. Therefore, it's state local.
That is a classical conservative federalist position. It's one with which I personally agree, but many people would say you have no heart because you don't want to fight the problems and alleviate poverty.
Wait, hold on. I have a counter to that.
You do?
See, for instance, I was talking to Mrs. Hammond about this because there was.
I'm sorry, you were talking with Teacher X about
Teacher
this.
X.
Oh, all right. Yeah. So she was talking about a law that was made about like disabilities in schools and how it should be, it's up to the psychologist to determine whether or not they should be able to go to schools. Well, there's circumstances there's always circumstances. So
yes.
Why is the federal government and it just doesn't make sense.
The federal government is like using a meat cleaver for surgery. It's not good at dealing with the exceptions. The exceptions are best dealt with at the most local level possible. Again, local, that's municipal, county, or if necessary, the state level.
Yeah,
but not the federal government of the United States. I'm sorry, Nome, Alaska is different from the Bronx, New York, is different from Memphis, Tennessee, is different from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And one size fits all is not a very good system. That's not our system is federal. Anyway, gotta move on. Thank you for waiting. You are last.
I just had to say about the testing that the type of vaccine that it is an RNA vaccine, which has actually been tested rigorously for different diseases, but also works on the coronavirus. And I think that it's not exactly politically correct for the government to be mandating these things, because that's a little bit too personal, but I also think that it would, to me anyway, it would be courteous to get the vaccine because there's, as far as we know, because the RNA vaccine has been tested, there's not really much of a risk, but there is one without getting vaccinated.
Eloquently said. Believe it or not, I actually kind of agree with it. I got the vaccine because I'm at risk. But what you ultimately said, if I'm not mistaking you, is that a person should choose. It would be best if they choose in a way that was, what you said, considerate.
Yes, it's like.
But it is their choice.
It's like with capitalism. It's great that people can rise and become multi-billionaires, but commonly a lot of those multi-billionaires today are not redistributing their money. They're keeping their money there, and I think that people should do these things of their own accord, like donate to charitable causes, but that the government shouldn't control that because that's just weird.
Yeah, it's like asking high school students to volunteer as a graduation requirement. It's not volunteering if you're forcing someone. Believe it or not, the people of the United States are the most charitably giving people on earth. We give huge amounts. But you're right. Thank you. Thank you all. Okay. So, the High Middle Ages, European civilization begins to build cities. And in doing so, European civilization stops being in a dark age. We are once again civitas people, people of cities, civilized people. And once again, Europeans in real time have to capture the skills or recapture the skills to preserve enough public health. Yeah, public health does have is a government's job to an extent. It's also a society's job to make sure that enough clean water gets to the people and that the people in cities aren't completely filthy. Oh wait, the Europeans never did that. European cities in the Middle Ages were absolute stench holes of filth. They were. What do you do with human waste? Well, you got chamber pots. If you're a civilized person, a burgher is for a townsman because burg, town. So it's morning and it's time to empty the chamber pots. So you open your second story shutters and maybe you shout, "Look out below!" or not. You just go slosh. I've said this many times. This is why gentlemen walk outside of ladies. If you are a gentleman and you are with your date, or if you're a son and you're with your mom, or if you're a dad with your daughter, you stand towards the street when you're walking on a sidewalk. The woman is next to the building. One reason for that is that men, it is our job to be protectors. That's in hunter-gatherer society what we did, and it's psychologically and physically what most men's bodies are designed to do. Why? Because we have to be around to conceive the next generation for a few happy moments. A woman needs to be there for 9 months to carry the baby to term, and ideally for several years after to nurse the child. So if somebody has to die to protect the future, it's going to be us, gentlemen, not the lady folk. This is unpolitically correct. It's also true, and it's reflected in almost every human society from the beginning to now. So men walk outside to protect the women, but also when the noisome, reeking, stench-filled yick flies out and hits the street, it's the guy that's going to be splattered with it, not the lady. So, gentlemen, remember this. When you are walking with a lady, walk on the outside towards the street, and the lady walks inbound of you. And this comes from a time when people just dumped their chamber pots in the streets. Now, what happened then? Well, eventually the rain would come. And the rain would cleanse it away. Sort of. But until then, you'd have layer and layer upon layer upon layer of animal waste and human waste, like a lasagna of absolute filth. And that was the city. Filled with rats, filled with fleas. City air was stench-filled, but city air is free air. So cities are built. The Normans conquer England. The Holy Roman Empire has a contest, an ongoing several hundred-year contest between emperors and popes. And sometimes the emperors and the royals of Europe win, and sometimes the popes win, but nobody gets a final decisive victory. By the way, that is a secret to freedom. The American Constitution is brilliant at allowing all sides to continue to function. No American election is going to definitively lock in a right-wing or a left-wing government and still be constitutional. Our system is not about building utopia. Our system is about maintaining free dissent, maintaining multiple opinions, having governments that shift to the left and to the right and to the center. That's the system. The goal is not a better world. The goal is the ongoing freedom of people right here, right now. Socialists, communists, others have a different attitude, and that attitude is very millenarian. It's similar to religious people who believe that the current age is completely corrupt, but there'll be a judgment day, and beyond that, there'll be the millennium, the happy world of the future. We'll talk a lot about that. So left-wingers do tend to believe in that they are building a better world, a more perfect society, and they're trying to prune human nature like a topiary tree in order to strip us of our greed and evil and all the rest. Anyway, so as with us, the Holy Roman Empire is an ongoing competition, among other things, between emperors and popes. The Crusades. In Hispania, on Iberia, in Portugal, in Navarre, in Leon, in Catalonia. On the Iberian Peninsula, the Arabs, as part of the conquests in the generation of the grandchildren of the Prophet Muhammad, sweep across North Africa and invade Spain. In fact, they invade France and almost succeed, except for the Battle of Tours. Most of Spain, except for a few pockets of Christian Visigoth rule in the Cantabrian Alps on the northern frontier of Spain, where it faces the Biscay Bay, the rest of Spain is occupied by the Umayyad Caliphate. From then, in the 700s AD, until 1492, the Spaniards and the other Iberians engage in what is known as Reconquista. Reconquista. Reconquista is the reconquest of Spain. It is a crusade within the nation to bring Christian Spain and Portugal and the other countries control over all Iberia, to drive the Moriscos, the Moors, the Muslims, the Moroccans, out of Europe back to Africa. So this is a 700-year war. 700 years. 700 years ago, the Black Death was hitting Europe. 700 years ago was still the High Middle Ages and the Late Middle Ages. That's a long time. So in Spain, you have what happens during a long war with people who live side by side with one another. There's a reason why Spaniards tend to have darker hair and darker eyes than any other European group, except for Sicilians and Southern Italians and Greeks. And the reason is the Arabs and the Spaniards did what my Irish and Puerto Rican and Cuban ancestors did in New York City. They fought one another until they started marrying one another and having children together. So the Arabs and the Spaniards are enemies culturally, but there is a lot of interbreeding, there is a lot of cross-cultural contact, and the reason that the Spaniards are the most advanced society in Europe in the late Middle Ages is because they capture Islamic cities, Islamic libraries, Islamic hospitals, Islamic water systems intact. They capture the experts that make those systems work, and those systems are then made to work for the Christian European Spaniards. No one else in Europe has the ability to do this. So Reconquista, La Cruzada in Spain, is, or the Reconquista, if you want to say it in English, is the longest crusade in the history of the West. However, crusading, as is classically understood, begins in the late 1000s after the AD 1071 Battle of Manzikert. At the Battle of Manzikert, which happens in Turkey today, here are the Taurus Mountains. They protect the Anatolian Peninsula from the Middle East. There are the Kilikian Gates, which are a set of narrow mountain passes that go through the Taurus Mountains. Up until 1071, AD 1071, the Byzantine Empire had held the Kilikian Gates and therefore maintained a strong empire. But at the Battle of Manzikert, the Byzantine Empire is humiliated and defeated. The Seljuk Turks invade Anatolia, and soon the Byzantine Empire is a hollowed-out shell. The Byzantines emperor begged the Pope, help your Christian brothers. Now, up until this point, there had been about 600-700 years of schism between the Greek Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church, but still, the Pope now, well, at that time, maybe 500 years, 400 years. What to do? Pope Urban II proclaims a crusade, a Christian holy war. And Crusader Knights go to Byzantium, they go to Constantinople, they go through, they beat the Turkish armies and fight their way to Judea and Jerusalem, and the First Crusade, surprise of surprises, succeeds. Now, for the next 100 years, there are a series of less successful crusades. The most famous battles are between Richard Lionheart and Saladin, the Kurdish general of Islam. There are disturbing events like the Children's Crusade, where thousands of children are recruited by idealistic, bright-eyed people to wage peace with the Muslims. And so these beautiful children and adolescents are sent to the Middle East to melt the hearts of the Muzzies. And what happens is they don't even get there, because the ships carrying them go to the slave markets of North Africa and Syria and sell these beautiful European children into a kind of slavery that I won't describe in this classroom. You can imagine the sorts of things that are done to these beautiful small children. The crusading spirit dies out after about 150 years. The Crusaders are defeated and return to Europe. And they return to Europe with a taste for civilization and luxury, and it is one of the things that ends the Middle Ages long term. The enlightened self-interest of wealthy people who want silks instead of linens as their undergarments. Think about linen, undergarments. Think about wearing curtains right next to your skin. Who want spiced foods rather than foods that taste like buttered turnips all the time. And that enlightened self-interest is going to bring trade. Now, among the fashionable woke professors of the academic establishment and in popular culture for the last 30 years, we in the West should feel horrible about crusading, fighting in the name of God like savage animals against the poor, innocent, peaceful Muslims, which is a distorted view. It's a very politically correct view, but it is a lie. Christianity has no tradition of religious war in its first 500, 600, 700, 800 years. The Christian faith has a history of being a persecuted underground minority, of being the dominant religion that will persecute pagans, and of being a religion of a series of barbarian kingdoms. Christians regulate war between Christian kings during the Middle Ages to try to make it less brutal. But Christians do not initiate a religious war for Christ anywhere except for in Spain until the Battle of Mansakert. Christianity has 150 years of experience with crusading, doesn't like it, and with the exception of the religious wars between Catholics and Protestants for the 150 years after Martin Luther nails his 95 Theses to the doors of the Wittenberg Cathedral, Europeans do not engage large-scale in religious warfare. My Irish ancestors in Northern Ireland are an exception. But in general terms, Christians crusading is a fairly rare event. And it's something that the West in large part has repudiated. Now, what these woke social justice professors don't tell you is that jihad is a fundamental duty of Islam. Jihad is Islamic holy war. Now, it can be the struggle to quit smoking or lose weight or get more exercise, but jihad is also classically understood as the faithful fighting to spread the faith by the sword. Islamic jihad happened in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, and it happens today. Jihad has never been abandoned by the vast majority of Muslims, Sunni or Shiite. Of the conflicts going on planet Earth today, over 80% of them involve radicalized Muslims of some kind. Holy war is not anymore what identifies us in the West, as slavery is something that defines Americans in the 21st century. We dabbled in it, we stopped it. Our enemies still embrace holy war, still embrace jihad as an obligatory duty to God. That is something worth noting. We are not fighting against people who are ashamed of their holy wars. We ourselves are sort of ashamed of ours. So the next time somebody talks to you about how bad it was that we crusaded, you might consider remembering what I just told you. That crusading was an atypical moment in European history. It is an ongoing characteristic of Islamic civilization, and that is a difference. The slavery thing I mentioned, I'll just explain in case you didn't understand what I meant. Yeah, we had slaves. So did everyone else before factories. But we fought our longest and bloodiest, well, not our longest, we fought our bloodiest war to end slavery. That's what defines us. And then 100 years later, we ended Jim Crow at the expense of many city neighborhoods burned by their own people in race riots. That's what defines us, our willingness to improve, not the fact that we were once different from how we are today. So the Crusades are a big deal in medieval history. Next time, we will be moving towards the late Middle Ages, and finally, next week, we will get into the Renaissance as well. Haley.
I went to service last night for church, and he talked about racism and contemporary status. I think he would consider watching. It was really interesting about how he described slavery and how it was different back in biblical times.
Yeah, it was. No, there are many kinds of slavery. Not all slaves are black, and not all slaves operate under the American chattel slavery system. But again, I say what defines us is that we ended slavery, not that we had it. But somebody who follows the 1619 Project would disagree. Any last thoughts? Yes?
Please, bathroom.
You don't need to ask. You just sign out the pass.
Well, like
The thing is, we're about to leave.
yeah, but I never have time. I was late for whatever periods.
Okay, look, today, yes. In the future, good luck, but probably not. But for now, get out of here.